right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first online genealogy class of the fall. This program is being recorded and it will be available on the BPL's YouTube channel and the genealogy playlist once it is ready. I will also be sending a link to everyone who has registered once it is ready, so you can look forward to that. I'm going to put a link to the handout in the chat right now in case anyone missed it in the reminder emails. So today's topic is Introduction to Genealogy, how to start your journey into your family's history. We just have a few more, hold on, here we go. Before we begin, we acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning. Deliberations and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. All right, so as some of you may have noticed, the chat box is open. So if you want, but we do have some rules about that. If you want to say hi and tell us where you're joining us from, please feel free, but not obligated to. All chat messages during the presentation and the Q&A period afterwards must be related to the topic of the presentation. This includes all questions, comments, and any resources you may want to share. So if someone has a question and you happen to know the answer to it, feel free to put it in there. But I do ask that you please be respectful of me and all other attendees. I will do my best to make sure I get to everyone's questions during the Q&A period. But if I don't get to your question, you can contact us via email at ask@bpl.org. So for those of you who may not know me, I'm Jessie Wheeler. I'm the genealogy specialist here at the Boston Public Library, and I work in the Research Services Department. So this is what we are going to be covering today. Good to see a lot of local people in here. That's great. So we got a lot to go over, so we're not going to dilly-dally here in the intro. We're going to be covering some genealogy research basics. We're going to look at some of the most popular record types you can use for research. And we'll take a quick look at some online resources. Also, as another note, everyone will be getting a link to be able to download my slides as well as the handout tomorrow night. So if you missed something here, you will be able to have that and the recording. So if you're taking notes, you don't need to worry about writing everything down because you will be getting all of this information tomorrow night. Okay, so genealogy research basics. So for starters, we're going to go over some terminology here. So what is genealogy? Genealogy is the study of families, which is mainly tracing the ancestors of a person and finding basic information about them. Family history is a little bit different. That is the study of families as a whole, but includes not only tracing the ancestors of a person, but trying to find out as much as we can about them. So by way of example, a genealogy, you're just putting names and dates on a family tree. For some folks, that's what they want. Family history, you're doing a group of people and you try to find out all of this information that you can, including where they went to college, what their job was, where they lived, things like that. However, these two terms, genealogy and family history, even though they are technically different, they're often used interchangeably, and some folks look at them as synonyms. So I would say you can use whatever word term you're comfortable with. I will probably be using both as we proceed through here. Okay, so when you're just getting started, and this is good for any type of research you're doing, you should have a clear goal in mind. So just a few questions to think about. How far back do you want to go? Do you want to just go to your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents? Do you want to go back to the colonial era? Do you want to go back even farther? Is there a specific person or family group you want to focus on? So is there just one branch that you're looking at? Are you looking at a paternal line, a maternal line? Figure that out. Even if you want to do all of them, you should have that in mind. And also, how much information do you want to find for each person? Do you just want to get the basic information, like birth and death, and that's it? Or do you want to find marriage or their job and whatever basically you can think of about the person? If your goal is to do an entire family tree, so starting with yourself and going back as many generations as you can, you should always start with yourself and then work backward. Some folks will start with a distant ancestor and try to work their way down. That is a little bit more complicated, so I don't recommend that if you're just starting out. And you should always start by by tracking down what you know. So if you know where your parents were from and their information, make a record of that. If you know grandparents' information, things like that, track that because you know what you know. So put that down first. Your next step should be to talk to your living relatives or anyone else that might have information about your family. So this could include your parents, aunts and uncles, cousins, siblings, step siblings, half siblings, and anyone who's related by marriage. Talk to them and see what they might know. They might have something like a family Bible that could have a lot more information in it. So talk to people that you know. In addition to family, there's a term that a lot of genealogy researchers like to use called the fan club, which is friends, associates, and neighbors. So this can be particularly useful if you're having a hard time finding information about a relative. You can try tracking down their friends, so people they were close with, associates, so someone that they worked with or that they were in a social group with, and their neighbors. So if they lived near your relative for a really long time, you can try, if they're still alive, you can try talking to them, see what they might have, or try tracing them to see if you can find any information about your relative. And you always want to record as much information as possible that you're looking for. So names, dates, and places, so you can track where people were. Again, no matter how much information you want to find, you should start with the basic information. So that's birth, death, and in many cases, marriage. You might want to find other information beyond that, but you should always start with the basics, just so you can ground yourself and you can have the information for the person that you're looking for. You also will want to use as many sources as possible. So we're going to be talking about some of the basic records in a little bit. So these includes things like vital records, census records, newspapers, and directories. Those are things that I like to recommend folks start with when they're just beginning their research. This can also include a lot of less common resources. So family Bibles, which we talked about, photo albums can actually have some information. A lot of folks used to write on the back of on the back of their photos, and that could give names and dates. If you're really lucky and you happen to find a collection of papers, so diaries and letters, those could have even more information. So when you get really deep into it, once you have the basics covered, you're going to want to look at things like that. And there's even more things that you can look at, even beyond what I have listed here. Documentation is very important. You want to be able to access the information in a way you can understand. So you want to keep it organized, but I don't have one I can recommend. I recommend people use whatever they're comfortable with. This is one of those fancy genealogy software packages that people sell. You can do that. Online family trees, so some things like Genie or Family Tree, Ancestry.com, and there's a bunch, and MyHeritage, and a bunch of other places. If those work for you, do that. A regular spreadsheet, that could, if that works for you, a binder with papers in it, that you can do that, or even just a regular old notebook that you write stuff down in. If that works for you and if you understand it, go with that. You don't have to use any particular thing. And also, and this is personally what I use, you can also, you have a filing cabinet, we'll fill with folders full of documents. And if that works for you, go for it. But what I will say, keep backups of everything, no matter what format you're using. So if you have physical records, make photocopies and keep them in a separate location from the originals. So if you have a safety deposit box or a fireproof safe or something like that, keep that stuff there. For electronic records, you can make backup copies. Most family tree websites will let you download your data so you can store it in an external storage device or upload it into a cloud server. You never know what might happen. So you want to always have a backup and keep updating your backups just to make sure you don't lose anything. Like if your computer gets broken or you have some damage to your house or something like that, just so you have everything still. This one is very, very important. And those of us like me who work at a library or an archive who help a lot of folks with this kind of research, keep notes on all of your sources so you can look back at them. I've lost count of how many times I've had folks who were here 10, 15, even 20 years ago come in and want to look at another resource again, but all they remember is that the book was read. And that's all they can tell me about it. So when you're using a particular source, there's a few things you should write down: the title, the author, if there is one, the year of publication, and the page number and where you used it. I've also had folks come here who swear they used a book here, but then it turned out they were actually using the resource at the New England Historic Genealogical Society, which is not that far away from here. So also keep a record of where you used it. Also, and if you are using information based on interviews, take a note of the date and the location of the conversation, just so you can keep that straight in your head. So document, keep notes on all of your sources. I cannot emphasize that enough. We've gotten through documentation. So now what actually is a good process? So again, as I said before, you should know what basic information you want for each person. Another key thing is don't rely on one source for a piece of information. You should always find another source to back something up when you can. If you can't, that's fine. They just should remember that, because all of these records that you're going to use for research, everything that you find, these are done by humans, and humans make mistakes. The best example I like to use is on the 1940 census. Leonard Nimoy, who was from Boston, he's listed as a girl. So and his name is spelled so wrong, I couldn't find it initially. I had to search his brother's name in order to find that family. So just keep that in mind. There could be a language barrier. There could be a transcription error from when it was put into the online software, or the handwriting of the person who wrote the record could just be atrocious. There's a lot of really bad handwriting out there that you're going to have to look through. Aside from official records, there's another thing to keep in mind. Family stories may just be stories. I've also, unfortunately, and I don't like doing this, have had to disappoint a lot of folks who have had family stories that they were related to such and such a famous person, and it turns out not to be true, or they were involved in something and they weren't. So things get passed down through the generations and get exaggerated. So don't base what you're recording just on a family story. It may very well be true, but you should find some other records to back that up and not just take a story passed down through your family. That's fact. So this is kind of a weird part. You will need, in order to find information for someone, you need information. This is particularly true if the person you're researching has a really common name. You would need to know something in order to determine that you're looking at the right person. So people that they were living with, where they lived, if you could figure out their middle name, that may be helpful. And you also need to know this to confirm an individual. So if you find a record, for instance, the Leonard Nimoy census record that I was just talking about, I knew it was him because he's a famous person, so it was a little easier. So there were biographies that had the names of his family in there. So even though his name was spelled wrong and his gender was written down wrong, I knew that was him because everything else in the record matched. Again, for a famous person, it's a little easier. If it's someone you know or you know enough about, you can usually be pretty sure that it's the right person. So if the name is spelled wrong, that doesn't mean it's not them if everything else looks right. So related to that, you can use information you already know about a person to find information. This is also really helpful if you're researching people that you knew personally. So parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and things like that. That's why I always say start with them, because you already know stuff about them, so you can find even more about them. What I just said, I got a little ahead of myself. If some things are a little off, but everything else lines up, it's probably the right person. But also the two most important things for this, do not be afraid to ask for help, whether this is you ask at a library, an archive, a genealogical society. People who do this kind of research, we love to help you with it. That's literally my job. That's my entire job, is to help folks with this. We're here to help you, so don't be afraid to ask. And also, this is really, really important, be patient, because this kind of research can be really time consuming. I've had folks who will spend literally all day on our computers here just looking through our databases. So it can be really time consuming, so just keep that in mind. So some notes now on names. So one thing to keep in mind, and it's especially if you're researching from a really long ago time period, standardized spelling wasn't really common until fairly recently. My favorite example that I like to use for this, there's a really old document relating to William Shakespeare. I think it was a letter or something he was writing where he spelled his own name 3 different ways in the same document. So standardized spelling, not really a thing. So you may have to search for a lot of different variations for a name. And also your relative might have used different names at different times. This is particularly true for women who were married. So there was one woman, I was researching for someone once who was married 3 times. And she used so she had a bunch of different last names we had to look up. And also she used different variations of her first and middle name and another name, which I think might have been her confirmation name. So it was all the same woman, but she had so many different combinations of names. It took a while to find all the information we were looking for. So you may need to try several different variations of your ancestors' first and last names to find them. So another example, one of my great aunts, I always knew her as Claire. Everyone always called her Claire. And I found her family in the census, and there was a Mary, but there was no Claire. So I checked with my mother's and I asked, was Claire's first name Mary? And she said, oh yeah. So I only knew her by her middle name. She went by her middle name, but her legal name was Mary, and she was Mary in the census. So that's another thing to keep in mind. There were a lot of Marys, particularly in the early 20th century. So that's one thing to keep in mind, particularly if you're researching a Catholic family. So somewhat related to that, researching women can be very, very tricky, particularly if you're researching women who lived before we got the right to vote. So lists of residents, that's one really good record set we're going to look at a little later. They were related to voter registration. So women in the US will not be on those until the early 1920s. Also, early city directories. So that's another resource we're going to look at later. They would not include women unless they were heads of household or had a prominent profession. So that meant they were widowed, or they were something really important like a doctor or lawyers. I think there were I've seen some with teachers in them. Later on, city directories would have married women, but they would be in parentheses after their husband's entries. It wasn't really until the mid-20th century, so somewhere around the 30s and 40s, where women would just be included in their own entries. So if you're researching women, you might need to search for their maiden name and their married name, names if they're married a few times. Again, you're gonna have to search for a lot of names. Also relating to the fan club, as we talked about earlier, if you're having a really hard time finding them, particularly if it's a really long time ago, try looking for close male associates. So you might need to look for their husband if they were married, or their father if they were younger, or if they were living with a different male relative, like a brother, or a cousin or an uncle or something, you might need to look for them in order to find them. All right, so now we're going to look at some of the most popular record types that folks use, and these are things that I usually recommend to folks to use when they're just starting out. So vital records, you're going to hear this a lot. They are government-produced records that document births, marriages, and deaths. So these are like some of the basic building blocks, and why they are useful, because they can have, in addition to just regular information about those events, they can have they can tell you where the person lived, what their occupation was, and they may also have information about their parents, where their parents were from, or their spouse or their children, especially if they're listed as next of kin, you might be able to get that information as well. So what the BPL has, we have published indexes for most cities and towns in Massachusetts, those are on the open shelves that you can just grab and look at. And you can also find these in the databases we have: Ancestry Library Edition and American Ancestors. Some of them will be available on other online resources that we're going to talk about a little bit later. The books we have, they will cover births, deaths, and marriages from the founding of each town up through 1849 or 1850. These are called the tan books because they're a lovely shade of brown. So if you go to any public library in Massachusetts that's big enough, chances if they have a genealogy collection, you're probably going to see these tan books. So this is a page from one of those tan books. This is for Beverly. So this is how most of them in this collection are laid out. A lot of published lists of vital records will be laid out the same way. So they'll be alphabetical by last name and then by first name. So you can see here, for instance, and you can probably see why I picked this one. So there's the last name. So then you'll have, so this is for births. So then the next name they'll show will be the birth. So this is Abigail Wheeler, and D means daughter. So if it was a boy, it would say son of John and Mary. So you know her father's name was John, so that's John Wheeler, and her mother's name was Mary. And this also tells you, so the BP is baptized. So oftentimes in the colonial era, all you'll get are baptism records. So you'll have an approximate idea of when they were born, but this was in the time before births had to be recorded. So you'll probably just get baptism records. But she was baptized on October 21st, 1694. So we can guess that she was probably born in October of 1694. So now we have a general idea of how old she was. We know her parents' first names, so then we can continue on from there. And deaths will be laid out the same way. They'll have the person's name, the day they died, and if you're lucky, it might have their parents' names if that information is in there, or it might not. Marriages, they do list the groom first. So it will list the groom, the bride, and the date of the marriage. And sometimes it will have the pastor who officiated. So census records are the other really big one. So we're talking mostly, there are state censuses, but there are not quite as many of those. So we're going to be focusing on the federal census, and those are taken every 10 years. Purpose of which is to count the population of the US. The first one was done in 1790, and the most recent one that was released was the 1950. The census records are made public 72 years after they were taken. That number was kind of chosen at random. You might hear that was chosen because that was the average lifespan at the time they made the decision. That's not true. No one really knows why they picked that number, but it's every 72 years. So like I said, the most recent one released was 1950. The 1960, it'll be a little while before that gets released. That'll be a few years. So these can be helpful because depending on the one that you look at, it could have a lot of information. So it will have the names and ages later on. It could also have occupations and addresses. If you get really lucky, like I did with one of my ancestors, it'll actually tell you what town in the country in Europe they were from, and if they spoke languages, whether or not they could read and write, what kind of job they have, where they worked. You get all sorts of information, even including what year they immigrated. So what we have, these are really widely available. You can find them all over the place. So we do have electronic access through Ancestry Library Edition. And they're also available on familysearch.org, which is a really great free website. You do have to register for an account, but it is completely free. I thought I had a picture in there. Okay. So my slides are a little mixed up. I apologize. So city directories, we didn't. Let me see if did I have a picture? Nope. Oh, there. Okay. I'm sorry. My slides are a little mixed up. So this is the census. So again, you'll be able to look at this more closely. I know the writing is kind of small, but these are generally how they're laid out. It'll tell you what census it is, the year, and it'll tell you where it is. So these are organized by street, so you can see all the names. Keep doing that so you can see all the names here. I'm sorry, this is very annoying. Come on now. Okay, there we go. Alrighty, so there we go. So they'll have ages in there. In some cases, it'll have for women, it'll say how many children they have, how many children they have living. So that can tell you that if there's a bunch of children there, that'll tell you if there are any that have passed away before this time. So then if you're looking for one of those children, you can get a better idea of when they died. It also tell you in this column here where they were born and then where their parents were born. Also here the language. So this is generally what they look like. It's basically a big old spreadsheet. And again, generally speaking, the later it is, so the more recent it is, the more information there will be in there. The 1790 census up through the 1840 census would just have a list of names of the heads of household, and then the number of other people in the house. That was it. And they didn't start listing once they did start listing that, it took them, I think, until 1870 before they said how people were related. And this one, it'll say who's the head of household, and then it'll say how everyone in that household is connected to them. So prior to 1870, you will have to basically make an educated guess as to who everyone else is. So let's get back. Okay, city directories. I know we'll fix these slides before I send them out to you tomorrow. Okay. So city directories, so these are going to be a listing of residents that are organized alphabetically by last name and head of household, and eventually later on by street address. So these are useful because they can contain the name of a spouse. Like I said, married women would be listed in parentheses after their husband. It will have their occupation, and if you're lucky, where they worked. And if you're really lucky, it'll tell you the name of the business where they worked. And if you're extraordinarily lucky, it'll have the date of death. This didn't always happen. It was based on self-reporting. So unless someone told the publisher that such and such a person died, it's not going to be in there. But I have found a date of death in these before, so I was able to find more information. So we have a pretty vast collection of these, primarily from Massachusetts. We have microfilm and hard copies of cities and towns in Massachusetts. For Boston in particular, that's our biggest collection. We have them going from 1789 to 1981, which is when the publisher stopped making them. For cities outside of Massachusetts, there's many cities all over the country did something similar to this. They might look a little different than Massachusetts, but we have a large set on microfilm. Mostly this is going to be the bigger cities. So we have, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia, and some other, mostly bigger cities. You can find these online in different databases and websites. However, I will say they're a little tricky to search. For instance, Ancestry.com does have some of these, but they often don't put in the whole volume or even every volume that's available. So it is useful if you're just doing if you want to just type in a search and not have to scroll through. But unfortunately, it's not complete, and there isn't one place where you can find everything. It's kind of scattered where all these are. So this is the 1922 Boston City Directory. So you can see here it's laid out alphabetically by last name and then first name. And then you can see it has their address. and some of them occupations where they worked, and there we go. So the governor, that was the governor of Massachusetts at that time is on here. His last name was Cox. That's why I picked this page. And again, depending on what time period you're looking at, they're going to look a little different. The format changed over time. Other states and cities, they might look a little different than that. Also, the size changed. So this one, so some of the volumes used to start out, they were something that men were supposed to be able to put in their pockets or pocketbooks. So they're pocket size, but they got bigger and bigger and bigger as time went on. By the time they finished publishing them in the 80s, they were gigantic. They were like atlas sized and really heavy. So another basic set that I like to direct people to is the list of residents. So this is another thing that other states and cities will have, but our primary collection is for Boston. So the collection we have that's widely available is 1919 to the present with gaps. A lot of them we have digitized and are available online. Our government documents librarian does a 50-year gap. So the most recent one he put up was from 1975. So for Boston, so for outside of Boston, again, this is primarily going to be Massachusetts. The years we have kind of varies. It's really just when they send things to us. So we don't have complete runs. It's kind of scattered. And they're not all in the catalog. So if you're looking for a list of residents for a city or town in Massachusetts that's not Boston, your best bet is to email us or call us to see if we might have it. Okay, so this is generally what the Boston list of residents looks like. This is 1922. So these are organized by ward and precinct. So it's really important. You kind of need to know where they lived. There was no listing just by name until the 1980s. So before that time, you will need to know where they lived in order to find them in there. So they will be organized by ward and precinct, and then alphabetical by street name, then numerically by house number, and then alphabetically by person's name. So these numbers here are the house numbers. So when you see a lot of entries at one number, that's probably an apartment building. That's one reason why a lot of folks will request to use these, because they're trying to establish that a certain place was either a single or multifamily dwelling, or they were trying to prove that such and such a relative lived in this place at this time. So another reason why I like these, they do include occupations. They will also have the age of the person. And also why I really like these, they'll tell you where they lived the previous year. So that's even if they happen to live somewhere else, it'll tell you there. Like if they lived in Connecticut the year before, they'll say they were in Connecticut. So you can trace them backwards and see where they went. And so this is one for the town of Middleborough from 1931. It looks fairly similar. Why I picked this one is this one also included national origin. So if they were immigrants, for at least for this year for Middleborough, they put whether these three people here are Lithuanian, this person was Polish, and they also put that they had one unit that was vacant in that building that year. So it's kind of, you never know what you're going to get in these, which is why they're kind of interesting. But otherwise, you can see they're fairly similar: house number, name, age, and occupation. Census record, okay. So newspapers. This is one of the things that we're known for. We have a large collection of newspapers from all over the world. However, the collection does primarily focus on the United States and Massachusetts. We have a lot of newspapers for Boston and primarily Eastern Mass, although we do have some from Central and Western. And the newspapers we have for other areas, again, it's going to be mostly big cities. So I think we have some newspapers from Atlanta, San Francisco, New York City, Philadelphia, places like that. We also have access to several databases that index numerous newspapers, again, primarily Massachusetts, but we do have some databases that will cover elsewhere in the country. We also do have obituary indexes, and obituaries are the main thing that a lot of people doing this kind of research will look for. So some of the we do have some indexes which will have the date of publication and sometimes the name of the newspaper. So now we're going to get into obituaries and death notices. Those are two different things. Obituaries are generally, they're going to be the longer things that'll give you a really full picture of the person's life. Death notices will by and large just have really basic information like when they died and when the services are. And sometimes they'll have next of kin in there. So it might say a spouse, or even if there's a spouse that predeceased them, it'll say the beloved wife of the late so-and-so, which is why they are useful. It's because they can have information about someone's family, what they did for work, residence. Sometimes it'll leave them information if they were involved in any charitable groups, if they were in any clubs, things like that. Sometimes if they were an immigrant, they'll tell you where they came from, when they arrived. Again, we have lots and lots of newspapers on microfilm and in databases. This picture right here, that is microfilm. Right? You may have heard the term microfiche. That is actually something different. It's a similar format, but those are rectangular sheets. And mostly what you're going to use is microfilm, which is what this is right here. Other things that people who have been doing it for a little while will tend to use, and these get asked for things like this a lot, are immigration records. So what these are generally, when you talk about immigration records, these are going to be passenger listings. So these are going to be exactly what they sound like, lists of passengers, usually on a ship. There are some airplane passenger listings out there, but not too many. So it's primarily going to be ships. So these can be really helpful because they will have information about where the person came from. So, and again, like the census records, generally speaking, the more recent they are, the more information that they will have in them. So we have books that, offer guidance in general about how to do this, because some of them are going to be tricky depending on where they're coming from. We have a set, for instance, that it's just passenger listings for people who came from Germany. We have another one for Italy. We have another set for Italy and another one for Ireland as well. And these things are going to be drawn from numerous sources. The publishers of those coupled them together from a bunch of different places. Some of them may just have index entries and you might have to go to another resource to find the full information, but they can still be really helpful in figuring out where you can get the information. So again, passenger lists, those are going to be the main things you're going to look at. So the people who arrived on a ship, they're arranged by date, and they will also show the name of the ship they traveled on and the last port they left from. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the place they departed from. We'll see a lot of folks would leave from England. So some of them may not have been from England. They might have been French or Italian, and they just traveled through England. So that'll just tell you where they departed from before they got to the States. And again, some of the other things you can find out in there is who they were traveling with. So if they were traveling with a family, if they were traveling alone, tell you where they came from, where they were going. Sometimes look at their age. Sometimes also during certain time periods, they were required to say who they were going to stay with. And folks often would go to join relatives that were already living in a place. So you can find information about even more family members that way if it tells you who they were staying with. And sometimes you'll even get an address that way. So what we have is, again, another microfilm collection that it's mostly for Boston, although we do have some other ports and time periods. We do have a set for New York City, which is also pretty big. So for our Boston set covers 1820 to 1943. These are also online in ancestry.com, which you do have to go to the BPL or your closest public library in order to use. But they are also in Family Search, which, as I said, is a free website. And I just think this is an interesting fact. So the records that we have in our microfilm collection, that's based on a project done by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s. One of the projects they set up was to look through all these immigration records and compile them in a way that was easier to research. Okay, so this is from 1922. So this is people arriving in Boston in April of 1922. This one is relatively easy to look at because this one is actually typed out. Some of them were handwritten and can be really tricky to look at. You can see here it has their name. Over here it has their occupation, what language they primarily spoke, the city of origin, and also their port of origin. And down here in this column here, that's who they were going to stay with. So for instance, this person here, so it says, I'm not sure what that says. They'll also, the print is too tiny here, so you can't tell. Sometimes it'll tell you if they were related to them, how. I've seen things like father, brother, sometimes brother-in-law, or friend, cousin. This is a continuation. It was a pretty wide record, so I had to split it up into two different pages. So this will give you information about, even more information about them. So for this time period, passenger lists is for your immigrant ancestors can have a lot of information you can use. Okay, cemetery records. Again, this is a little bit more, you're getting a little bit more advanced here. So we have a lot of these. They can have not only the location of the grave, but sometimes the date, the date of death, date of burial, and in some case of some collections, headstone inscriptions. So if they had a decoration on there, something else written on there, sometimes headstones will have, if they had multiple people buried in there, they might tell you how they're related to each other. So you can get another lead that way. Some of these volumes have been digitized and you can get online through our catalog. A lot of them are just going to be on the Internet Archive, so you can just do a Google search. So this is just one of them. So this is from the Granary Burying Ground, which is one of the historic cemeteries in Boston. If you've ever walked the Freedom Trail in Boston, you've been by there. You can see here it's laid out alphabetically by last name and then first name. So this one right here, for instance, this was Caroline Francoeur. So this will tell you this was what was on the tombstone. So it says November 27, 1827. AE means age. That's how they wrote age. So you can see she was 68 years old. So from there, you can make an estimate as to when she was born. So if you're looking for her birth record, now you have a general area where you can start. And it also has the plot numbering here. Since this is for one specific cemetery, it'll tell you where exactly they're buried if you wanted to go see it. Okay. Just give me a moment. All right. All right, online resources. So a lot of the stuff I've been talking about is some of it's available on hard in physical format only, but a lot of stuff is available online. So the main databases that we have that folks use are American Ancestors, which is just in the Central Library. That's done by the New England Historic Genealogical Society. They are the oldest genealogical society in the country, and they have a really good collection, and some of them are things that only they have. And there's Ancestry Library Edition, which for Boston Public Libraries, in libraries only, but at all locations. So you can use it at any of our branches. A couple of our newer ones are My China Roots, which is for researching Chinese ancestry, and it's a relatively new database, so it's constantly getting updated and getting more records put in. It's great because you can search using Chinese characters, transliterated Chinese, or English. So it's really great if you're doing that kind of research. And My Heritage Library Edition, which is a genealogy database technically, but it also has a really robust collection of newspapers, many of which were scanned from the Boston Public Library's collections. So we had a partnership with them. They scanned a lot of our Boston newspapers. So you can get to these through our website. And again, you'll be getting a copy of these slides later. And this link is also in your handout. So if you have a Boston Public Library card or e-card, when you get into our website, you can just, let's see. So here's, you gotta scroll down. There's American Ancestors, Ancestry Library Edition, which again are in library use only. But if you scroll down here, you want to use My China Roots, you can go there. Also, there's My Heritage Library Edition. I'm actually will be teaching a class about my heritage in November because it can be a little tricky, but it's really, really great. It's got a lot of great stuff in this. And this one you can use from home if you have a BPL card or e-card. So you can see here, not only do they have newspapers, but they also have maps, they have birth, marriage, and death records, they have census records, they have photos. I have a coworker who was able to find in here the patents that her grandfather had. He was an engineer, so he had a lot of patents. So she thought it was really cool. So you never know what you can find in here. Newspaper databases, you have a lot of them. We're going to take a look at the list in a little bit. The main, the big ones that we use here, that folks use here, will be the Boston Globe. We also have the Jewish Advocate, the Irish Times, and the New York Times. And as I mentioned, there's a bunch in my Heritage Library edition. Another one that I really like is 19th century US newspapers. This is particularly useful because although the Boston Globe is still around, they weren't started until 1872. So if you need to look up anything before that, you need to go to another resource. So again, you can access these through our website. There we go. So we've had some changes recently on our newspaper offerings. So that's why you're going to see all these buttons for new things. There we go. So Massachusetts newspapers, there's the Globe. Also, there's 19th century newspapers. So they have things from all over the country. So if you're looking for outside of Boston, you'll be able to find some things in there. Another one that we have things from outside of Massachusetts is the Newspaper Archive. And they also have the Globe, they also have the Boston Post, and they have things from a bunch of other states. One of the free resources that we have are our research guides. So these are guides that were put together by BPL staff that put together information and links to other resources to help you do whatever your research you're trying to do. There is, of course, a genealogy one. So it's pretty robust here. It's actually 4 guides here. So you'll see links here. These are the different pages we have. I do try to keep on top of it, but if you do happen to find a broken link somewhere, you can just email us and we'll fix it. So this will tell you, like here, if you want to read even more about how to use the census, this will give you more information about it, how you can find the census, different types of, special census records, which we didn't go over, and even more about how they work. We have some related ones. We do have a guide just for our newspapers because we have so many. This will include lists of all the different kinds of newspapers we have, whether there's access online in a database or what we have on microfilm. So for microfilm, you can see here on these lists, we're just going to look at the Boston one. See here, it is 18 pages, and these are all just Boston. Boston has had a lot of newspapers in its time. And we have a few other free resources. We have more than this, but we don't want to overwhelm you because I know we're covering a lot. So Digital Commonwealth, it's photographs, manuscripts, books, letters, all sorts of things. It has contributions from libraries, historical societies, and other institutions all over the state. Boston Public Library, what we have in there, we have a lot of prints, photographs, we have some newspapers in here, posters, we have some prints, etchings, we have the anti-slavery collection, we have a lot of photograph collections. But what I really want to highlight here is the Boston Pictorial Archive. So this is a really interesting resource. For instance, if you have an address for someone you're looking for, if you want to try to see if there's a picture of a business or a house, you can try looking in here. There's a lot of pictures of commercial buildings and residences in here, just some neighborhoods. If you want to know what a neighborhood looked like at a different time, you can look in here. We also have, as I mentioned before, an obituary database. It is not comprehensive. This was a limited project from a few years ago. This has the Boston Evening Transcript, the Globe, and the Herald, but it only covers right now 1932 to 41 and then 53 to 2010. It is incredibly basic. You can really only search by one of these things. So let's say if I wanted to do my last name. So this is the results. You'll get the name, the age. This is just based on what was published. So sometimes you'll have a death date, but more importantly, it'll have what newspaper it was in. You will then have to probably request it on microfilm in order to actually look at it. But if you happen to be looking for someone in these newspapers in these time periods, this can be really helpful. So there's plenty of free websites out there for genealogy. We're just going to look at a few of them. First one is Cindy's List. For those of you who are old enough to remember Yahoo, when a Yahoo was really popular, it's kind of like that. It's lists of links and different subjects. So click on the categories here. There's pretty much any topic related to genealogy that you can think of. There is a category for it. So let's say we want to look at Eastern Europe, and then there's even more categories. I'll tell you, so let's say census. So this will give you a list of all the different websites that have census records for this area. Caveat I will say with that, Cindy is a person and she's the only person that maintains this website. So there might be some broken links in there. But so just let you know, it's just one person and she's lovely. And Family Search, which I have mentioned before, I strongly recommend using this because they have a ton of stuff that is also in Ancestry, but you can use it from home and it's completely free. You do have to register for a free account, but you'll just get some extra emails from them. So it's pretty easy. You can connect it with Google, Facebook, whatever. And they have lots of different things. They actually, this Massachusetts State Archive had a partnership with them. So there's a lot of Massachusetts vital records in here. So let's see if we can get, let's see, they have genealogies. Let's see. They have so many things. There we go. So they have the other reason why I like this is they also have a lot of research guides. So they'll tell you things like what they have available. They'll have links to other things that are available elsewhere. So it's really, again, they have a ton of stuff in there completely free. So that's why I really like to recommend them. Another useful website is Find a Grave. I will give you a caveat with them. These are based on user submissions, so you can't always take everything in there as completely true. So for instance, we're gonna just to show you an example. Let's put in one of my ancestors. The Stockbridge. There we go. No, I don't. No, that's not what I meant. Yeah, they redesigned this recently, so it's a little tricky. There we go. There we go. That's the button I meant to click on. There we go. Okay, there. Okay, so this is him. Nope, that is Illinois. Okay, so okay, that is all right. So fine because it went and deleted that. Okay. Really wish they hadn't made that change. The search button used to be right there where it says browse. That's why that happened. There we go. All right, so we click on that. So a lot of entries will look like this. They'll have, if you're really lucky, they'll have a photograph of the grave. There are some people who they have the time. They will go to a cemetery and just take pictures of as many of the graves as they can. And they also transcribe them. So this will have what was on the tombstone. So there we go. So that tells you when and where he was born, when he died. I can tell you because I've done further research on him. He did serve in the Civil War. So this is my 5 times great-grandfather, I think. So there we go. So that's just, again, basic, but again, it's based on user submissions. So you want to take it with a grain of salt. And so just keep that in mind. All right. So if you are, like some folks and they're better at learning visual learning, there are lots of videos out there that can help you. So you can take a look at the genealogy playlist on YouTube. So you'll see there recordings of classes that I've taught in the past, and also recordings of guest speakers talking about various topics. This is also where you'll be able to find eventually a recording for this class. So we have stuff there going way back. That's one resource we have that there isn't. There we go. So we talked about American ancestors. So you do, again, for this one, the full database is only available at the central library, but if you register for a free account, there are some free resources, including a video library. They do have a lot of free programs that'll go over, sometimes they do author talks. Sometimes they'll be talking about a specific thing, or sometimes it'll just be general. It's really, really interesting, some of the things that they cover. Another resource is Legacy Family Tree. It is a paid site, but they do have a good amount of free webinars that you can watch. I don't think they might also require you to register for a free account. They just want to email you and try to get you to pay for it, but you don't have to do that. They're not loading for me right now. Oh, there we go. So right now they have 440 free webinars here. So they'll go over goes over different things, from introductory level things to really, deep in the weeds, like this one right here about DNA tools. Then there's also Roots Tech, which is associated with FamilySearch.org. Roots Tech is a conference that is put on every year. The actual conference is located in Salt Lake City. However, during COVID, they started doing things online. So now they kept doing that. So they have a lot of videos for the conference that you can watch online. They're completely free. They cover really different topics, including basic beginner stuff, DNA and AI. That is a really hot topic these days. Again, this is completely free. You just have to register for a guest account. All right, so that's the end of my slides. So we do have some time for questions if anyone has any. We do have one here already. So Jean asked, are we able to access BPL databases from home? So like I mentioned, MyHeritage you can get from home with your BPL card. American Ancestors is only at the Central Library. Ancestry.com is at any BPL location. So another thing I'll mention related to that, anyone who lives in Massachusetts can get an e-card at the BPL and access these things. Okay. Okay, so Dante is asking, what kinds of records can we find at the City of Boston Archives? So funny you should mention that. Next week, we actually will have a guest speaker from the City Archives that will be talking about that very topic. That is next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. So if you're really interested, you can tune into that one. But briefly, I can say they have things like tax records, business registration things. So if you have a relative that owned a business here, there'll be records on that. Going back to Leonard Nimoy, they have a record there where when he was a teenager, he did some photography. So he would basically walk around and ask people want their picture taken. So he registered himself as a business. Okay, so Elaine's asking, is there a resource for people of Greek ancestry that you could recommend? I don't know off the top of my head. There are probably some things in ancestry.com. What I usually will recommend to folks is there are genealogy societies for literally any topic you can think of. So there's probably a genealogy society for Greek ancestry. There's probably might even be one if there's a place where they settled in a particular place, there'll probably be something like that. For instance, I know there are genealogy societies for people of German descent in Illinois. That is one thing that exists. So you can try just, again, doing some Googling, see what you come up with that way. There are also a lot of Facebook groups. Facebook is still pretty active for genealogy, and a lot of folks on there, they'll be happy to guide you and help you figure out where you can go. Okay, so somewhat related to that, if you happen to be researching someone who's not in Boston or in Massachusetts, and this is true for wherever they are, particularly in the US, contact the library or the nearest big public library that you're researching. If they don't have what you're looking for, they can tell you where to get it. That's what I say in all of my classes. If you're contact the library at the place that you're researching, someone can help you there. And again, there's historical societies all over the place that will have records as well. So that's another avenue you can try. Okay, let's see. So wait a few more minutes to see if anyone else has any questions. So those of you who were who arrived late, this program was recorded and everyone will be getting a link to the recording once it's ready. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. You'll also be getting a follow-up email from me with a link to the slides and the handout and also the chat transcript. So if you missed anything, you will be able to get it again. And also in the email, there'll be information about our upcoming programs. Like I just mentioned, next Wednesday, we will have a guest speaker from the Boston City Archives talking about all the great resources for genealogy that are there. My next class I'm teaching will be in October. That will be on researching Italian American ancestry. So if that's something you're interested in, check that out. So Kathleen's asking, did all states produce directories? Again, I can't tell you for sure, but what I can say is probably, and there might not be one for every single city, for every single town in the country, but they did tend to mostly be for the bigger places. And sometimes if there was like a really sparsely populated area, you might get a county directory, something like that. So again, I can't tell you for 100% sure, but probably, yeah. Particularly cities will have them. Wait, let's see. I'll do a couple minutes. All right. So yes. So that seems to be it. So if you think of something that you wanted to ask that I didn't cover, you just shoot us an email at ask@bpl.org. We also have a live chat Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we do answer the phone. We do only have the phone from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, but if no one answers, it's probably because we're already on a call or we just stepped away from the desk. So leave a message, so we will get back to you. We respond to every single phone call that we get. If you actually leave a message. If you don't leave us a message, we're not going to call you back. So leave us a message if you call and no one answers. All right, so that is about it. Thank everyone for coming. I hope you got some useful information, and I hope we see you again soon. Have a good night.